My ex-girlfriend's wedding reception was not where I expected to have the strangest night of my life. But here I was. The Whitmore estate was packed wall to wall with people who all seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Tall floral arrangements lined every table. The chandeliers threw soft gold light across the room. A live band was playing something slow and elegant in the corner. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne like they had been doing it their entire lives. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt completely wrong. I had been invited because Dana, my ex, believed that staying friends after a breakup was a sign of emotional maturity. I had agreed to come because saying no would have started a conversation I did not want to have. So I put on my best gray suit, drove 40 minutes to the estate, shook hands with people I barely knew, and found myself a quiet spot near the back wall where I could stand without being absorbed into the crowd. I was holding a glass of sparkling water, not champagne. I needed to keep my head clear. The room was loud, not in a fun way, in that specific way where everyone is talking at the same time and none of the conversations actually mean anything. I had been to enough of these events to recognize the pattern. People smile. People laugh at the right moments. People say congratulations and mean it for about 4 seconds before moving on to the next handshake. I checked my watch. I had been there for 41 minutes. In my experience, 60 minutes was the minimum required to leave without being rude. I had 19 minutes left. That was when I saw her.
Viviane ne hale?
Dana's mother. She was standing near the edge of the dance floor in a midnight navy wrap top and matching skirt, dark hair pinned back with a single jeweled clip. She was the kind of woman who never blended into a room. Even in a crowd this size, she stood out. Not because she was loud or flashy, but because she carried herself like someone who had fought hard for everything she had and won most of those fights. I had always respected her. In the 2 years Dana and I were together, Vivian was never unkind to me. She was sharp and direct and sometimes a little intimidating, but she was fair. Even after Dana and I ended things, Vivian had sent me a short message saying she hoped I was well. That was more than most people would have done. But the woman I was looking at right now was not the composed, steady person I remembered. Something was wrong. Her jaw was tight. Not the kind of tight that comes from smiling too long. The kind that comes from holding something back for hours. Her grip on her champagne flute was too firm, her knuckles slightly pale against the glass. Her eyes were moving across the room in a way that had nothing to do with enjoying the party. She was not looking for someone to talk to. She was calculating, measuring, searching for something I could not immediately identify. I watched her bypass 3 separate people who tried to catch her attention. A family friend who waved. A woman in a red dress who reached out to hug her. A man in a tuxedo who said something she did not respond to. She moved through all of them like they were furniture. And then she looked directly at me. I did not look away. There was no point. She had already seen me. She moved through the crowd with quiet purpose.
No hesitaste. No ditur.
She came straight to where I was standing near the back wall, and she stopped close enough that I could hear her clearly even over the noise of the band. She leaned in slightly. Her voice was low and controlled, just above a whisper. "I need to talk to you privately," she said. "Not here. Your car. Can you go now?" I looked at her face. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them. Not panic exactly. More like the look of someone who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just made the decision to put it down. "Give me 2 minutes," I said. She nodded once and turned away without another word. I set my sparkling water down on the nearest table. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I did not look for Dana. I just walked toward the side exit, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped out into the cold night air. The parking lot was quiet, a long stretch away from the noise and the light of the reception. My car was parked toward the back of the south section, away from the row of luxury vehicles near the entrance. I walked to it, unlocked both doors, and turned on the dome light. I positioned the car so both doors remained visible to the cameras mounted on the estate's exterior walls. Then I sat in the driver's seat and waited. She came through the side door exactly 90 seconds later. She walked across the parking lot without rushing. Head straight, shoulders back, the picture of composure. But when she reached the passenger side and I got a clear look at her face in the dome light, I saw it. The faint tremor at the corner of her mouth. The slight tension pulling at the skin near her eyes. Whatever she was about to tell me, she had been carrying it alone for a while. She sat down, closed the door, placed her small beaded evening bag on her lap and pressed both hands flat against it like she was steadying herself. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she turned to face me. "Arthur," she said quietly, "I need your help, and I need you to understand that this has nothing to do with tonight. Nothing to do with Dana. Nothing to do with anything personal." "Okay," I said. "Someone is trying to take everything I built," she said, "and I have 14 days to stop them." I did not say anything right away. That was not because I was surprised. It was because I have learned over the years that the first thing someone says in a moment like that is never the whole story. So I waited. Let the silence sit for a few seconds. Let her decide how much she was ready to give me. She reached into the beaded bag and pulled out a folded document. The paper was thick, official. There was a red border stamped across the top of the first page. She held it out to me without saying anything more. I took it and read. It was a formal debt acceleration notice. The kind that does not arrive unless someone has been planning its arrival for a long time. The creditor listed was something called Crestfield Advisory. The amount was $6.2 million. The cure window was 14 days from the date printed at the top of the first page. That date was 4 days ago, which meant she had 10 days left. "Tell me about Crestfield Advisory," I said. She folded her hands in her lap. "It's a shell company," she said. "I didn't know that at first. My firm, Hale Interiors, has had a line of credit for 3 years. It was through a regional lending group. Standard terms. We never missed a payment. Not once." She paused. 18 months ago, that line of credit was sold. I was notified as required. The new holder was Crestfield. I did not think much of it. These sales happen all the time. "And now Crestfield is calling the full balance," I said. "Yes. Who owns Crestfield?" She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds.
Roland Fitch.
I knew the name. Not well, but enough. Roland Fitch was her business partner. They had built Hale Interiors together over 6 years. He handled the operational side, contracts, vendor relationships, logistics. She handled the creative direction and the client relationships. By all public accounts, it had been a productive arrangement. "He's been your partner for 6 years," I said. "Yes. And he bought your debt through a company you didn't know he owned." "Yes." I set the document down on my knee and looked at her. "What does he actually want?" She turned to look out through the windshield. The lights from the estate glowed faintly in the distance. "There is a clause in our original partnership agreement," she said. "It was written in standard language. I reviewed it with a lawyer at the time. It seemed routine." She paused again. "If the firm defaults on any debt obligation, Roland has the right to trigger an emergency equity transfer. He gets controlling interest. He gets the firm." "He engineered the default," I said. "He bought my debt," she said. "Then he spent the last 4 months quietly creating conditions where I could not service it. 3 of my largest commercial contracts have been sitting in review holds. The project managers keep receiving conflicting information from a third-party contractor. Deadlines get missed. Payments get delayed. The money that should be coming in has been trickling in instead." She exhaled slowly. "I did not see it clearly until last week. I thought it was bad luck. Difficult clients. Normal delays. But when I sat down and looked at the full picture, the pattern was too clean, too precise. This was not bad luck. It was a strategy," I said. "Yes." I looked back down at the document. The numbers were already organizing themselves in my head. A 6.2 million principal. 4 months of engineered revenue loss. 10 days remaining on the cure window. The math was not friendly. "What does your current cash position look like?" I asked. "Not enough," she said simply. "Not even close. And before you ask, I have already spoken to 2 banks this week. Both of them declined to extend credit. Roland has relationships at both institutions. I cannot prove he made calls. But the timing is not a coincidence. I believed her, not because I had verified anything yet, but because the structure of what she was describing was recognizable to me. I had seen this kind of move before in different industries with different players. The mechanics were always the same. Isolate the target. Cut off the exits. Apply pressure from multiple directions at once so the person is too busy reacting to see the full picture until it is too late. Roland had been patient, careful. He had timed this well. He chose tonight, I said. Your daughter's wedding reception. He served this notice knowing you would be here. She nodded slowly. The notice arrived at my office at noon today. My assistant forwarded it to my phone. I have been sitting with it for 7 hours. She looked at me then, directly, without deflection. I came to the reception because not showing up would have hurt Dana. So I came. I smiled. I sat through the ceremony. I gave a toast. Her voice stayed even, but I could hear what was underneath it. And then I saw you standing in the back of that room, and I remembered that you are the best analytical mind I have ever personally encountered. And I thought, if there is one person who might be able to see a way through this, it is him. The dome light hummed quietly above us. Outside, a car rolled slowly through the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the windshield and then disappearing. I will be honest with you, I said. Based on what you have told me, the probability of a clean resolution is low. The timeline is short. The debt is large. And whoever helped Roland close those bank doors did him a significant favor. She did not flinch. I know. But low is not zero, I said. She looked at me and waited. I need full access to your financial records, I said. Server access, physical files, vendor contracts, every document connected to those 3 delayed projects. I need to see everything Roland touched and everything he did not touch. And I need to start tonight. She reached back into her bag. She pulled out a small card with a handwritten access code on it. She had come prepared. My office is 20 minutes from here, she said. I started the car. We left the wedding reception without saying goodbye to anyone. Dana probably noticed. I did not care. Vivian sat in the passenger seat, holding that red-bordered document against her lap like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. She stared straight ahead the whole drive. I did not push her to talk. I watched the road and let the silence do its work. Her office was a converted brick building in the design district, 20 minutes from the estate. Even at this hour, past midnight, the place had a certain warmth to it. Exposed beams, drafting tables, material samples pinned to corkboards in careful rows. It was the kind of space that told you everything about the person who built it. Every detail was intentional. Nothing was accidental. I plugged in my encrypted drive, bridged into her financial servers, and got to work. The first thing I noticed was not the debt. It was the pattern underneath it. Roland had not attacked Vivian directly. That would have been too obvious, too easy to trace. Instead, he had spent months quietly pressing on every soft spot around her. He had contacted her project managers with small pieces of false information. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create doubt. Enough to slow approvals. Enough to push deadlines back by days, then weeks, then longer. He had filed procedural complaints with 2 of her subcontractors, triggering payment holds that looked like standard review processes from the outside. From the inside, they were a wall. A slow, invisible wall that had been going up brick by brick while Vivian kept working, kept pushing, kept believing the delays were just bad luck. They were not bad luck. I sat back in my chair and looked at the screen for a long moment. This man had been planning this for at least 8 months. Vivian brought me a coffee without asking. She set it down near my keyboard and leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, watching my face. She was trying to read me the way I was reading the numbers. I kept my expression even. "What do you see?" she said. It was not really a question. It was a woman bracing for impact. I told her the truth. Roland did not want the money. The 6.2 million was never the goal. It was the lever. He wanted the firm. He had engineered a situation where she would either default and trigger the forced equity transfer, or scramble to liquidate assets fast enough to pay him off and walk away with almost nothing either way. He had built a box with no door. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she straightened up, pushed off the desk and said, "So we find the door he forgot to put in. Show me where to start." That was when I understood what kind of woman she was. We drove to her largest active project site before the city fully woke up. A corporate campus redesign on the north end of downtown, 3 buildings mid-renovation, scaffolding still up on the east face. I walked the site with a tablet and a flashlight in the gray early morning, checking material deliveries against logged invoices, timing workflows, photographing progress markers. Vivian walked beside me in flat shoes and a coat that was slightly too thin for the temperature. She did not complain once. What I found on that site made my jaw tighten. The delays were not coming from inside her team. Her people were working hard. They were working efficiently. The bottlenecks were all external. Specific suppliers were running late on deliveries by just enough to stall the next phase of work without triggering formal breach clauses. The timing was too consistent to be coincidence. Someone had made calls. Someone had applied pressure from outside the project entirely. I photographed everything and said nothing until we were back in the car. "Roland reached into your supply chain," I said. "He has been slowing your biggest contracts from the outside. Your team is not the problem. They never were." She stared through the windshield at the scaffolding on the building across the street. Her hands were folded in her lap. Still. Very still. Then she said something I did not expect. Her senior site coordinator, a woman named Petra who had been with the firm for 11 years, had flagged 2 of those supplier delays 3 months ago. She had written it up in an internal memo and sent it to Roland directly because he was still listed as the compliance contact for vendor relations. I turned and looked at her. "He saw it coming," she said quietly. He knew Petra had noticed. And he did nothing, because doing nothing was the plan. We returned to the office. I rebuilt the financial model with the physical site data folded in. I ran it 4 times. Each time the output was the same. The most direct path to clearing the debt before the buyout clause activated was liquidating her flagship studio space. The property value alone would cover the immediate shortfall. Clean. Fast. Decisive. I told her. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She looked at the number on the screen for a very long time and then she looked at me. "That studio is where I signed my first real client," she said. "It is where I took every phone call when this firm was just me and a folding table. My daughters used to fall asleep on the couch in the back room when they were small because I could not afford a sitter. I am not selling it." She paused. "Find another way," she said. Her voice was soft, but it landed like something heavy. She left the room. I stared at the screen. My cursor sat motionless over the execution command. Outside, the city was starting to move. Trucks on the road. Lights coming on in windows. The world continuing without any awareness that a woman's life work was balanced on the edge of a single spreadsheet cell. I closed the macro. I was not done yet. I did not sleep. I pulled every financial tool I had access to and rebuilt the model from the ground up. Bridge lending facilities, secondary lien structures, revenue-based financing against her active contracts, asset-backed arrangements that would let her retain the studio while still generating enough liquidity to challenge the debt. I ran the numbers forward and backward. I stress-tested every assumption. I looked for anything Roland might have missed. Any gap in his construction wide enough to thread a solution through. By mid-morning, I had 8 potential paths mapped out on the whiteboard across from my workstation. By early afternoon, 6 of them were gone. Each one collapsed under the same pressure. Roland had not just attacked her cash flow. He had quietly damaged her credit standing with 2 of the regional lending institutions she would have naturally turned to. Small things. A disputed invoice here. A delayed filing there. Each item individually explainable. Together, they painted a picture of instability that would make any traditional lender hesitate at exactly the wrong moment. He had thought of almost everything. Almost. Vivian came back into the room around 3 in the afternoon. She had changed out of the wrap top and skirt she had worn the night before into dark trousers and a ribbed deep V sweater in charcoal gray. her hair pulled back simply. She looked like she had not slept either, but she carried herself with a kind of deliberate calm that told me she had made a decision somewhere in those hours. She was not going to fall apart. She had decided that before she walked back through the door. She looked at the whiteboard without saying anything for a moment. "You crossed out a lot of options," she said. "I crossed out the ones that do not work," I said. "How many are left?" "2. And one of them depends on something I have not confirmed yet." She nodded once. Then she pulled a chair to the corner of the table, opened her own laptop, and got to work beside me without asking what to do. She started pulling vendor agreements from her digital files, cross-referencing contracts, building a parallel timeline of Roland's movements through the firm's finances going back 14 months. She was not a financial analyst, but she was precise and she was focused, and she caught 2 documentation gaps I had missed because she knew her own filing system better than anyone. We worked like that for hours, side by side, mostly quiet, the occasional short exchange about a specific figure or date. The afternoon light shifted through the windows and turned orange and then disappeared entirely. Around 7 in the evening, the overhead lights began to flicker. The fluorescents in that section of the building were old, and the unsteady hum they produced was the kind of sound that pressed against concentration like a dull headache. I got up, found the secondary lighting panel in the hallway without asking where it was, and switched the room over to the warmer lamp circuit. The flickering stopped. The room settled into a steadier, quieter glow. I moved the small space heater from the corner closer to her side of the table. The window behind her had a slow draft bleeding through the old seal. She had not mentioned it. I had noticed her shift in her seat twice in the last hour. I sat back down and returned to the screen. A few minutes passed. Then she said, without looking up from her laptop, "Thank you." I did not respond. There was nothing to add. At 9:47 in the evening, my phone buzzed on the table. A secure message from my legal contact back at my firm who had been monitoring Roland's wire activity throughout the day. I read it once. Then I read it again. Roland had filed an emergency material change declaration through the partnership agreement's compliance mechanism. He was citing disruption to active client contracts as evidence of operational instability. The filing had triggered an automatic freeze on all of Hale Interior's operating accounts pending procedural review. The freeze was effective immediately. Payroll was due Friday, 2 days away. I set the phone down carefully. "Vivian," I said. She looked up from her screen. I told her. She stood up slowly. She did not speak right away. She walked to the window and stood with her back to me, looking out at the dark street below. The city outside was quiet at this hour. A few cars. A streetlight catching rain that had started without either of us noticing. I could see her reflection in the glass. Her hands were clasped in front of her, pressed together firmly. Her shoulders were very still for a long moment, and then they moved once, a small involuntary movement she could not fully control. "I built this," she said. Her voice was low and even, not dramatic, just honest. "I built every piece of it from nothing. I made payroll through months when I was not sure I could. I kept every person on my team through 2 recessions and a market collapse. And now I cannot protect them from one man who decided he wanted what I built." She stopped, pressed her fingers harder together. "My daughters know this firm," she said. "They grew up understanding what it cost. And on Friday I have to look the people who believed in me and tell them I could not make it work." I stood up from my chair. I walked to the window and stopped about 2 feet behind her. I did not touch her. I did not reach for a statistic or a probability. I did not open my mouth to fill the silence with something useful. I just stayed there, present, solid, not going anywhere. After a moment she said, "I do not know how to fight someone who keeps moving the walls." "You are not fighting him," I said. "I am. Your job right now is to stay standing." She turned from the window. Her eyes were dry, but the steadiness in them had cost her something. She looked at me for a moment in a way that was different from any of the other times she had looked at me that week. Not with urgency or strategy or exhaustion. Just directly, clearly, like she was seeing something she had not expected to find. I held her gaze and did not look away. Then I picked up my coat and my keys and walked out of the building into the cold night. I found the corner cafe 1 block down the street. I ordered a black coffee and a blueberry muffin, the only food they still had out. I paid, nodded to the woman behind the register, and walked back through the rain. When I came back through the office door, Vivian was seated at the table again, her laptop open, already working. She looked up when I set the coffee and the muffin down beside her. She looked at the cup, then at me. "You walked out in the rain for this," she said. "You needed something," I said. "Sit. Drink it. We still have work to do." She wrapped both hands around the cup. A long breath left her, slow and quiet, and something in the room shifted very slightly. Not solved, not fixed, but steadied, like a building that had been shaking finding its footing again on solid ground. I sat back down at my screen. We were not done, not even close, but we were still in the room, still working, still moving forward one number at a time. And somewhere in the stack of contracts I had not yet fully read, I had a feeling Roland had left something behind. A gap. A shortcut he took because he was confident she would never look that deep. I was going to find it. I pulled the next folder and kept going. At nearly 3 in the morning, I found it. Not a smoking gun. Not a dramatic confession. Just a single paragraph buried inside a stack of contractor agreements so dry and dense that most lawyers would have skimmed past it without blinking. But I do not skim. I read every word of every line of every page. That is why Roland thought he could get away with this. He was betting that nobody would go this deep. He was wrong. The clause was inside a Tier 3 supplier contract. A commercial textile vendor based out of the Midwest. Small company. Unremarkable. Exactly the kind of contract a man like Roland would assume nobody cared about. The language was standard on the surface. But buried inside subsection 4 was an assignment clause that explicitly required written consent from Hale Interiors before any associated liens could be transferred to a new controlling party. Roland had absorbed this contract when he purchased the debt through his shell company, Crestfield Advisory. He had never obtained that consent. He had never even asked for it. He moved too fast, assumed Vivian would be too shaken to look this far down, and skipped the step entirely. The debt acquisition was not just aggressive. It was procedurally void. I read the paragraph a second time, then a third. I cross-referenced it against the standard filing requirements I had memorized years ago. The language held. The omission was real. Roland had built his entire trap on a foundation that had a crack running straight through the middle of it, and he had no idea we had found it. I sat back in my chair. Vivian was across the room, standing at the filing cabinet, her back to me, still pulling folders. She had been at it for over an hour, quiet and focused, moving through the physical archives with the same patience she had shown all week. She had not complained once. I said her name. She turned around. I pointed at the screen. She walked over and leaned in close, reading the highlighted paragraph once. Then again. I watched her face. She was still for a long moment. Then she straightened up and exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled, like someone who had been holding their breath for 5 days and was only now allowing themselves to let it out. "Is this enough?" she asked. "It is enough to destroy his position entirely," I said. "But I need the original signed version of this contract. The physical copy with the wet ink signature. Digital versions will be challenged. Roland will claim the file was altered. We need the document he cannot argue with." She looked at the storage boxes stacked against the far wall. She had not opened most of them in years. She pulled the first one down without being asked. Took 40 minutes. She went through every folder methodically, reading the labels carefully, setting aside anything that might be relevant. I stayed at the terminal and began drafting the counterclaim documentation, building the legal argument around the procedural void while she searched. The room was quiet except for the sound of paper and the low hum of the server racks. Then she said, "I have it." She was holding a rubber-banded folder, slightly dusty, the label written in faded ink. She brought it to the table and opened it carefully. Inside was the original agreement, printed on heavy paper, with a wet ink signature on the final page. Exactly what we needed. I looked at the signature line. I looked at the assignment clause. I looked at the complete absence of any consent documentation attached to the file. Roland had nothing. I called my firm's managing partner at 5 in the morning. I laid out the full picture. The procedural void, the fraudulent freeze order, the documented interference with her client accounts. I told him about the bridge facility I needed, collateralized against the flagship studio's appraised value. Funds pre-cleared for noon release on Friday. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he said, "You really went all the way in on this one, Arthur." I said the asset was sound and the interference was the only problem. He approved the terms before 6. By the time Friday morning came, I had not slept since leaving the reception. My eyes felt like sandpaper. My back was stiff from 2 days in the same chair. None of it mattered. Roland had scheduled the partnership dissolution meeting in his own offices on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. He had chosen a location 25 minutes from Vivian's office. We drove there together in my car. Everything about his meeting room was designed to feel like the outcome was already decided. The view was wide and expensive. The chairs on his side of the table were slightly higher than ours. The air smelled like money and certainty. His 2 lawyers had their laptops open before we even sat down. Roland looked at Vivian the way people look at something they have already decided belongs to them. He did not look at me at all until I opened my briefcase and slid 3 identical folders across the table. Then he looked. "The debt acquisition is procedurally void, Roland," I said. My voice was level. I did not raise it. I did not need to. The document in front of him said everything louder than I ever could. His lead lawyer picked up the folder, started reading. The room was very quiet. I watched the lawyer's eyes slow down over subsection 4. I watched him read it again. I watched him turn to Roland and give a small, grim nod. Roland's face did something complicated. Vivian reached into her bag and placed the original contract on the table directly in front of him. The wet ink signature faced up. She did not slam it down. She did not raise her voice. She set it down with the calm precision of someone who had already won and simply wanted him to understand why. "You built a trap," she said quietly. "On a foundation you never bothered to read. This firm is mine. It has always been mine. We are done here." Roland opened his mouth. He closed it again. The numbers did not lie. They never do. Nobody clapped. Nobody celebrated. Roland stood up from his chair, said nothing to either of us, and walked out of his own meeting room with his lawyers moving quickly behind him. The door clicked shut, and just like that, 5 days of constructed chaos folded in on itself like a bad hand of cards. Vivian did not move for a moment. She sat with her hands flat on the table, looking at the original contract still sitting in front of her. I started collecting the folders and organizing them back into the briefcase. I did not fill the silence with words. Some moments do not need narration. Then she laughed. Not a loud laugh. Not a relieved one. Just a small, quiet sound that escaped before she could stop it. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth and shook her head slowly. "He really thought I wouldn't find it," she said. "He thought you would stop looking before you reached the bottom," I said. She looked at me. I did not look away. "We need to get back to the office," I said. "The bridge funds clear at noon. We have documentation to file." She picked up the original contract and held it carefully, like something she planned to keep for a long time. We drove back to her office together. By 11:45, the freeze order had been lifted. By 12:03, the bridge funds had cleared and the full $6.2 million principal had been wired to Crestfield Advisory, wiping the debt completely. By 2 in the afternoon, Roland's legal team had filed a withdrawal of the forced dissolution. His lawyers sent a single email.
No explanation. No apology.
Just 2 sentences confirming that Crestfield Advisory was releasing all claims against Hale Interiors effective immediately. Vivian's office manager, a steady woman named Patricia who had been with the firm for 11 years, cried at her desk when she heard payroll would be processed on time. Vivian walked over and put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing. That was enough. I stayed until the final compliance documents were filed. I organized the closing paperwork into a clean manila envelope, labeled it and left it on Vivian's desk with a note that listed every document inside and the order in which they would need to be retained for the next regulatory review. Then I picked up my briefcase, said goodbye to Patricia, and walked out into the cold afternoon. I drove home. My apartment was 40 minutes from her office, the same distance from the Whitmore estate where this had all begun 5 days ago. My phone did not buzz. My calendar had nothing scheduled for the rest of the day. The city moved past the windows in its usual way, indifferent and continuous. I should have felt the clean satisfaction of a finished job. The numbers had balanced. The firm had made a strong return on the bridge facility. Every professional metric pointed to a successful close. Instead, my apartment felt like a room someone had recently left. I sat at my desk and opened the wrong file out of habit, then realized it and closed it again. I made coffee I did not drink. I stood at the window for a while, watching the street below without really seeing it. I am not a man who struggles to identify problems. I identified this one without difficulty. The issue was not the silence. I had lived in silence for years and never found it lacking. The issue was that I now had a specific reference point for what the silence was replacing. Her voice at 3 in the morning, reading a contract label out loud to make sure she had the right one. The way she set a cup of coffee down on the corner of my workstation without saying anything because she had noticed I had not stopped moving in for hours. The particular sound of her exhale when she found the original document in that dusty folder. Not dramatic, just real. My phone buzzed at 7 in the evening. I have the final signed documents from the bridge facility closure. May I bring them to you? I replied yes before I finished reading the message. She arrived 40 minutes later. Dark coat.
No briefcase.
No corporate posture. She was holding a manila envelope and she looked like a person who had slept for approximately 3 hours in the past 5 days, which was accurate, and still somehow looked more composed than most people do at their best. I opened the door and she stepped inside and I noticed she looked at the apartment the same way she looked at a project site. Carefully, with genuine attention. I would have mailed these, she said, but I wanted to see who you are when there is no fire left to put out. She walked to the middle of the living room and turned around slowly, taking in the clean lines, the ordered shelves, the single piece of abstract art I had bought years ago because the proportions were mathematically balanced. She smiled at that one. You fought for things I could not put in a spreadsheet, she said. You understood what the studio meant without me having to explain it twice. You went without sleep and turned down a bribe and drove to a warehouse at dawn and bought me coffee at 3 in the morning without being asked. She paused. That last part might have been my favorite. I crossed the room. I had made the decision 3 days earlier, walking past a jeweler's window on my way back from the courthouse. It had not felt impulsive. It had felt like the conclusion of a calculation I had been running for longer than I realized, one where every variable kept returning the same result. I reached into my jacket pocket. Vivian, I said. My voice was steady. My pulse was not. I am not someone who acts without data, but I have run every model I know and the answer does not change. You are not a variable I want to optimize away. You are the part that makes the rest of it mean something. She looked down at the ring. Then she looked up at me. Her eyes were bright and her expression was the kind of open that takes a long time to earn. Yes, she said. Not hesitant. Not careful. Just yes, clear and warm and absolute, the way she said everything that actually mattered. I put the ring on her finger. She looked at it for a moment, then leaned her head forward until it rested lightly against my chest. I put my arms around her. Outside, the city continued its usual noise. Inside, the apartment was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not empty, not hollow, just still. The kind of still that means something is finally, completely home.